Good afternoon, everyone. We would like to welcome you to the Department of Local Government Finance webinar about the Pay 2022 property tax data submission process and the compliance reviews that the department conducts involving property tax data. My name is James Johnson, and I serve as the director of the DLGF Data Analysis Division. This webinar, which will last roughly an hour, will focus on several different areas related to property tax data, which is also referred to as abstract data. First, the information covered in today's webinar will provide you with a greater understanding of the process for submitting your property tax data via Gateway Abstract. Additionally, we will discuss the compliance review process that the department conducts on the property tax data during the spring, as well as how the real property and personal property data reviews from the fall factor into our compliance review process in the spring. Finally, we will discuss how the public can obtain the abstract data without needing an account to sign into Gateway. Please note that the focus of today's webinar is primarily on the property tax data that county auditors submit each year during the February-March timeframe. That said, county assessors may find the information covered in today's webinar beneficial, since we will be highlighting the connection between the real and personal property assessment data and the property tax data as it relates to our compliance review process. One other quick item to note about today's webinar, and reiterating a point that Jenny made during her comments, questions are certainly welcomed. If you do have any questions that come up during today's presentation, please type those into the question box, which should be at the bottom right-hand corner of your Teams window. If time allows, we'll try to address some of those questions at the end of today's webinar. Additionally, we'll be compiling the questions and the department's responses to those questions into a Q&A document that will be sent out or posted to the department's website soon. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into our presentation. So the next several slides that we'll go over will probably serve as a recap for county auditors that are logged in this afternoon, since the vast majority of counties have already submitted their Pay 22 abstract data in Gateway. So we are now in our fourth year of using Gateway Abstract as the official mechanism for a county to submit their abstract data. For those of you on today's webinar that were around before 2018, worked in the county auditor's office, you probably remember that in prior years, you would have to complete a massive Excel template that had multiple columns worth of data, and you would send that Excel template to the Auditor State's office for their review and approval, and then you would generate two data files from your tax and billing system, the tax data and adjustments files, that you would send to the DLGF and to LSA. So it was kind of a two-step process. Well, starting with the Pay 2019 cycle, everything was consolidated essentially into Gateway Abstract. So county auditors now generate from their local tax and billing system a series of 7 different text files that they then upload to Gateway Abstract. And as part of those 7 data files that you generate from your tax and billing system, the tax data and adjustments or adjustments files are included in that upload. Just as an FYI, the tax data file is going to provide you a complete listing of all the tax records that you calculated a tax liability for the Pay 22 cycle. It's going to list the taxpayer name, address, tax liability, their assessed values, and then the adjustments file is going to provide a complete inventory of all credits, deductions, exemptions that are tied to the different records in the tax data file. So because the tax data file and the adjustments file are included as part of your upload to Gateway Abstract, county auditors are no longer required to email their tax data and adjustments files separately to the department or LSA. So in other words, once you submit your data files in Gateway Abstract, you complete your submission, we have access to the tax data and adjustments files, and you do not need to email those 2 data files to us separately like you had prior to Gateway Abstract becoming the official submission for abstract data. So after county auditors have successfully uploaded their files to Gateway Abstract, they're going to click a button within the application that says Run Calculations. And then once Gateway Abstract runs through the calculations, the auditor will then go through and review the results in Gateway. Depending on how large of a data set you're working with, it might take a few minutes to run through the calculations, so you might want to be patient with it after you upload your data files and click the Run Calculations button. One thing to point out, county auditors will need to review all the various screens under the abstract section in Gateway Abstract, and they'll need to complete their official submission under the review section of Gateway Abstract, which we'll have a few screenshots in the next few slides that will go over this process. After the county auditors submit their abstract data in Gateway, the Auditor of State's Office will review the submission and will ultimately grant final approval of the information that you provided in Gateway Abstract. And the deadline for the submission of data in Gateway Abstract was yesterday. It was March 15th. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the vast majority of counties met that deadline. There might be a small handful of counties are still waiting to submit their data, but I believe almost all the counties met that March 15th deadline of submitting their data, Pay 22 data in Gateway Abstract. So the next few slides of our PowerPoint presentation will highlight the file upload and submission process of your files in Gateway Abstract. As I mentioned earlier, for most of you, this will probably just be a recap of what you have done during the past week or so when you have uploaded your data to Gateway. So when you're getting ready to submit your data files in Gateway, you'll have to log into Gateway. And this, of course, what you see on the screen is what we say, it's the Gateway main menu. Over on the left-hand side, under the green highlight section there, that's the DLGF applications that pertain to data that we administer or handle. And what you would want to do is click on the abstract link, and that will then take you to the Gateway Abstract homepage. Now, one thing I would point out on the homepage, before you actually even get to the point of uploading your files, you want to be sure that you complete the pre-abstract survey. That is typically launched sometime in January, if I'm not mistaken, and that information goes to the Auditor of State's Office after you submit it. So before you even upload your data files, you want to be sure that your pre-abstract survey is completed and submitted in Gateway Abstract. So let's say you've done your pre-abstract survey, you've calculated tax liability for Pay 22, you're now ready to upload your files in Gateway Abstract. You'll want to click on the File Upload option under that data section on the left-hand side. And that will take you to the file upload screen. This is where you will upload your 7 different files that pertain to your abstract submission. Now, one thing to note for counties that do not have TIF districts, and I think there's probably only 4 in the state that don't have TIF districts, even if you don't have a TIF district in your county, you still will need to generate the TIF tax, TIF sum, and TIF tax subfile from your tax and billing system and include those as part of your upload. In other words, all 7 data files will need to be uploaded into Gateway Abstract in order for the system to process your calculations. Even if there might be 0 records in one of those data files, it will still need to be included in your data submission. So you'll click on the file upload there, you'll choose your files, and you'll want to be sure you upload each of the 7 files. And as part of the upload process, there's kind of a 2-step data validation that will happen. Once you select your initial files, your TIF tax, your TIF sum, your adjustments, TIF tax sup, AppCert rates, and app tax sup, and tax data, those are the 7 data files. After you choose those files and you click upload, there will be an initial file validation that happens that will look at the header record in each row in each file to verify that the county number is correct and that the pay year is correct and that the overall structure of the file is correct to be uploaded. So that's the first validation that happens. And then assuming that passes muster, then what you'll do is click on the Run Calculations for Upload. And there's going to be another series of checks that happen to verify that certain data points are all correct and matching back to information provided in your pay 22 certified budget order. So assuming that everything passes those 2 steps of the data validation, you should see all green, and that's what you're aiming for when you do a file upload to Gateway Abstract. This means that the system was able to upload your files and then successfully run the calculations on the data within the different data files. So it's important that you look for all green status for all 7 files when you run the calculations. One thing I would point out that if there were an error, just let's say one error in one data file that you tried to upload, that will prevent the system from running calculations on the entire data set. So in other words, your data files have to basically be clean or error-free in order for the calculations to run correctly in Gateway Abstract. So assuming that everything processes successfully, as you can see on the screen, everything's listed as green, that means that the calculations on your data files were able to proceed in Gateway Abstract. So after that happens, the county auditor will then want to go through each of the screens under the abstract section on the left-hand side, and they'll want to review that information just to verify that it looks right and matches back to what you can see in your local tax and billing system. There is, at the bottom of the left-hand side on the screen, there's a county review section, and that review section is going to provide certain checks that exceeded the allowable tolerance for the Auditor of State's Office. I believe for the pay 22 review cycle, I think it's either 15% tolerance or a 20% tolerance. So if there were certain tax districts that had certain types of their AV that exceeded that tolerance, that's going to show up on this county review section. And when that happens, the county will need to provide additional information under the county response section for why there is a larger than expected variance. For example, on this screen, you'll see that tax district 004 Etna Green, for the total personal net AV, there was a 27.53% variance between the net AV that was provided by the county when they submitted their CNAB last summer and what is provided in the abstract information that they just uploaded. So the county would need to provide an explanation for why there is a larger than expected variance, larger than 15 or 20% variance for that particular tax district for the personal net AV. It's possible that after you upload your data and you run your calculations, you may have tax districts where none of the AV exceeds the 15 or 20% variance. And if that's the case, then this particular screen, the county review section, would actually be blank. There wouldn't be anything for the county to have to provide in terms of an explanation for why their variances are outside that tolerance. But if there are items on the screen, the county auditor's office will need to provide additional information for why those variances are larger than expected. And another thing that the county auditor will need to do after they're working through and reviewing the information is that they'll want to verify that each screen under the abstract section portion of Gateway Abstract has been reviewed by the county auditor. And all this should be listed as green. Again, green is what you're looking for because green means go in Gateway Abstract. If there were a particular section on this screen that was listed in red, that means that there's a certain page and under that section of Gateway Abstract that you'll need to review before you complete your submission in Gateway Abstract. But under this particular example, it looks like all the various screens have been reviewed by the county auditor so that they should be good to proceed with submitting their abstract data. So once you've gone through that process, you'll then go to the submit screen. You'll click on the I acknowledge that all the abstract sections have been reviewed and confirmed and the abstract is ready to be submitted. Type in your name and your PIN and you click submit, and then your abstract data will be officially submitted to the Auditor of State's Office. Now the Auditor of State's Office will acknowledge your submission. They'll review that information. They'll follow up with you if they have any additional questions regarding your submission, and then they'll ultimately grant final approval of what you provided in Gateway in terms of explanations for your data. As an FYI, in case you need it, the Auditor State's Office provides a very detailed user guide for abstract submission. If you go to their website, the Auditor State's website, under the Local Government Division section, there is a link for the Spring Abstract Manual, and that manual provides a lot more detail on the overall submission process of your abstract data, just in case you need that for future reference. So that's how you submit your abstract data to the state via Gateway Abstract. Let's talk about the actual data compliance that the Data Analysis Division here at the DLGF conducts on certain data files once they have been submitted in Gateway Abstract. So since the Pay 2019 cycle, the DLGF has been the primary overseer of the compliance review process for the property tax data that the auditors submit in Gateway. So essentially, once Gateway Abstract became the official mechanism for submitting Gateway Abstract, the department became the primary agency that was going to oversee the compliance review of the property tax data the auditors submit. Prior to 2019, both the LSA and department would conduct a joint review of the data. But with Gateway Abstract now the official submission, the department has become the official overseer of the property tax data compliance review process. One thing to note about the property tax data compliance review process, it is slightly different than the real and personal property data compliance reviews in the sense that it takes place in only one phase during the spring, and that's after the county auditors have uploaded and submitted their property tax data to Gateway Abstract. So the compliance review process of property tax data or abstract data includes the following checks that are actually conducted within the Gateway Abstract application itself. And these are things that I touched on when we were going over the screenshots of the different file upload screens in Gateway Abstract. So a number of checks that are performed, and this happens when you click that Run Calculations button in Gateway Abstract. One of the checks that the system will look at is the parcel or property record number format. So this is simply to verify that for any real property records in your data set, that if they're real property, they're 18 digits in length, and that the first 2 digits start with the county code. For any personal property, annually assessed mobile home records, or oil or gas records, if you're a county that has oil or gas assessments, that check is going to verify that the first 2 digits of the property number starts with the 2-digit county code. Another check that is performed within Gateway Abstract after you click the Run Calculations button is a check to verify that there are not any duplicate parcel numbers. So when you're uploading your tax data to Gateway Abstract, each property record in that file should be a unique instance. There should not be a duplicate of a property number in the data set. The Gateway Abstract application also looks for valid state assigned district checks. That's to verify that every record in your tax data file, the state assigned district, taxing district assigned with that record, it matches back to a valid taxing district that was included on your Pay 22 certified budget order. So the tax districts have to match between the budget order and the abstract data. There is also a check performed in Gateway Abstract on invalid property type codes. Essentially, any property record in your tax data file that is a real property record should have a property type code of R. If it's a personal property record, it should have a property type code of P. If it's a mobile home, an annually assessed mobile home record, it should have a property type code of M. If it's an oil assessment record, it should have a property type code of O. And if it's a gas assessment record, it should have a property type code of G. So if there is an entry in that field that's not one of those 5 property type codes, that's going to generate an error that will prevent your data files from processing successfully. We also look for, in the Gateway Abstract application, we look for any instances of invalid adjustment codes in the adjustments file. And as I referenced earlier, the adjustments file is going to provide a complete inventory of all deductions, exemptions, and credits associated with the tax records for that particular cycle. And there is a code that pertains to each specific deduction or exemption or credit that comes from a list in the Property Tax Management System Code List Manual. And I realize that's a mouthful, but there's a list in that manual, Code List 30, that lists out all the various deductions, exemptions, and credits that the county can use when they're generating their tax data. So if there's an invalid entry if there's an invalid entry in the adjustments file that does not match back to Code List 37, that's going to generate an error that will prevent your files from being able to process in Gateway Abstract. And then finally, Gateway Abstract performs a calculation on TIF district IDs in your data set. So as an FYI, the state format for a TIF ID or TIF district ID is the letter T, starts with letter T, and then the 2-digit county code, and then the 3-digit code that corresponds to that specific TIF district. So if there are any instances of TIF districts in your data that do not adhere to that format, that will generate an error that will prevent your data from being processed in Gateway Abstract. So those were the checks that are performed within the actual Gateway Abstract application itself. So beyond Gateway Abstract, the Data Analysis Division performs a number of compliance checks on essentially the two primary files of your Gateway Abstract submission, and that's your tax data and adjustments files. So the checks that we perform as part of our compliance review, one of them is a verification that there are not any negative or non-numeric assessed values in your tax data or adjustments files. Essentially, if there is an assessed value in your tax data file for any record, it should be 0 or greater. There should not be any negative assessed values in your data files. We also perform a check that looks for any instances of blank taxpayer names. So every tax record should have an entry provided, a value provided for the taxpayer name. We do a check on government-owned parcels within your data set. These are real property parcels within your data set that have a property class code in the range of 600 through 669. And the guidance that the department has provided counties in the past is that when the county assessor is getting ready to roll their values from their office over to the auditor's office in the summer, any government-owned parcels should have an assessed value of 0. This particular check is going to look for any instances of records where the assessed value is greater than 0. So that would flag a record as part of this particular check. And then we do a similar check for non-government owned exempt parcels. These would be parcels that would be owned by a non-for-profit, for example. They typically have a property class code in the range of 670 through 699. And the guidance that we have provided the counties in the past is that for these records, when the county assessor is rolling their values over to the auditor's office during the previous summer, these particular records should have a value an assessed value greater than 0. And then when they get imported into the auditor's tax and billing system, the auditor's office will apply the applicable exemption to that record, which will then likely take the assessed value down to 0. But they start off with a value greater than 0 when they're rolled from the assessor's office, and then when they get into the auditor's office tax and billing system, the exemption that's applied will take the assessed value down to 0, more than likely 0. It could be something greater than 0 if it's only partially exempt. But this particular check is looking for any instances of where the non-government owned exempt parcels actually have an assessed value of 0 when they're rolled from the assessor's office to the auditor's office. And then we perform a number of mathematical calculations on the various AB allocations in your tax data file. So within the tax data file, you're going to have a value for total land, a value for total improvement, a value for total land and improvement, and then the tax data file is going to break down that assessed value by the various AV allocation buckets. For example, is the property all 1% homestead assessed value, or is it 2% farmland? Is it 2% commercial apartments, or is it 3% commercial industrial? So we do a check to verify that the various AV allocations in those 1, 2, 3% buckets actually add up to the value shown under the total land, the total improved, and the total land and improved values. And again, it's just kind of a mathematical verification that the AV is adding up as it should be. And then we do a kind of a cross-comparative analysis between the information that you provide in the tax data file and compare that to what you provided, what the county assessors provided in the parcel file the previous late summer or early fall. And as part of that analysis, we look for records that might be missing in either data set. For example, are there records in the parcel file that do not show up in the tax data file, or vice versa? Are there records in the tax data file that do not show up in the parcel file? And then we look for any discrepancies in gross AVs between the two data files. We do a very similar analysis between the PERSPROP, or the personal property data file that's provided by the county assessor. Compare that to the tax data file that's provided by the county auditor. Again, looking for any records that might be in the PERSPROP file, but not in the tax data file, or records that might be in the tax data file, but are not in the PERSPROP file. And then we do a check for discrepancies between gross AVs in those two data files. Now, to help our team, the data team, with our review process, we asked, or will ask, the county auditors to provide a copy of their lot modification tracking document, which will help us with verifying any discrepancies that may show up in the gross AVs between these different data sets. So talking a little bit more in detail about the lot modification tracking document, this is a standard report that is set up in your county's tax and billing system. So it's not a specialized report that you're going to have to reach out to your vendor to create. It's already set up within your tax and billing system. In fact, we have worked with the various tax billing software vendors to verify that their systems can generate this this particular report. We call it the lot modification tracking document. It might be labeled something slightly different in your tax and billing system, but the format is overall the same regardless of the tax and billing system. What the document is, it simply provides an inventory of all property records that have had their gross assessed value changed or modified between the time of the roll and balance process during the previous summer to the point of when the auditor's office is calculating taxes on those records for the current cycle. So what we will do with this information is, when we're running our comparative analysis between the parcel file and the tax data file, or the PERSPROP file and the tax data file, if we notice that there are discrepancies between gross AVs or records in either data set, we're going to look at the lot modification tracking document that you provided us. And if we see a corresponding match in the property number between the document that you provide us and what's showing up on our checks, we'll remove that record from our check so that you won't get dinged for it. So it's a way to basically kind of verify, yep, you have a listing of why there's a change or a modification in the gross assessed value for a particular record. If you have not done so already, county auditors, please email your lot modification tracking document to the department's data inbox. That email address is data@dlgf.in.gov. And when you send that information, you want to be sure that your tracking report provides information for both your real property records and your personal property records. Depending on which tax and billing system you use, some systems combine those in one report, some separate them out into different reports. So if you're a county that the information is separated into different reports, you want to be sure you send both the real property and personal property lot modification tracking documents. So when the department completes its review of a county's property tax data, it's going to send the county auditor 2 documents in an email. This email will have a property tax issues workbook, which is generated as an Excel file. And that Excel file is going to provide the county with a list of itemized breakdown records that were generated when we ran your data through our compliance review and generated possible or probable data errors when we were reviewing the data. And then the other document that we provide on the email or attached to the email is the compliance report itself. And that is a PDF document that provides a summary of the analysis of the different checks that we performed on the data, as well as, probably most importantly, the official compliance status for the property tax data. So talking a little bit more about the property tax issues workbook, this workbook will contain multiple tabs, and each tab on the workbook will pertain to a specific compliance check that we ran on the property tax data. And the issues that are listed on each tab mean that that particular record generated either a possible or probable error when we ran it through our compliance review process. The property tax issues workbook that the county auditors will receive, it will contain the same parcel to tax data and purse prop to tax data tabs that are listed on the issues workbook for the real property and personal property workbooks that the county assessor's office will receive. That way, both offices know that when we're doing that comparative analysis of the parcel to tax data or purse prop to tax data, if there are any discrepancies in records that are in one data set but not in the other, or discrepancies in gross AVs, both offices will know what that information is. So that's why we provide those tabs on both the property tax issues workbook and then the real property or personal property issues workbook that go to the county assessors. In terms of an official status issued at the end of the property tax data compliance review process, there are two different outcomes. One is non-compliant, the other is compliant. Obviously, the goal is to be compliant at the end of the process. But if a county's property tax data is deemed non-compliant, the county must review the errors that we note on the issues workbook, make any necessary corrections to those records, and then resubmit their data, their tax data adjustments files, for another round of reviews by the department. If the county's property tax data is deemed compliant, which again is what you're aiming for, there's no further action required by the county auditor in terms of correcting and resubmitting their data files for the Pay 22 cycle. That said, we do highly recommend and encourage you to review the items that are noted on your issues workbook, that you go through those records and determine what applicable records may need to have corrections made to them, so that the errors don't carry forward into the next submission cycle for Pay 2023. A couple of things to note about this upcoming review cycle. For the Pay 22 review cycle, the department will be using a 3% tolerance when reviewing the property tax data that you submit in Gateway Abstract. So in other words, if the total assessed value for the list of records that is generated for a particular data check that we perform on your data, if that total AV exceeds 3% of your county's overall total gross assessed value from your property tax data, the data set will be deemed non-compliant. So if there is one check that has one record and that assessed value is so huge that it exceeds 3% of your county's overall total gross assessed value, then that's going to make the entire data set non-compliant. That probably won't happen, but in theory, it's possible that one data set, one record, and one check could potentially make the data set non-compliant. So again, for this cycle, it's a 3% tolerance that we're working with when reviewing your data. Another thing to note about the Pay 22 review cycle, we are adding a few new checks to the process, to our review process. So there's going to be a total of 6 new checks that we're going to perform on your property tax data. One of those checks involves the tax data file, and it's looking for any instances of blank taxpayer addresses. So basically the standard is every record in your tax data file should have a valid street address, a valid city or town, a valid state, and a valid zip code listed in the taxpayer information. And if it doesn't, we're going to flag that as an issue, as a record on your issues workbook. In the tax data file, we're also adding a check for invalid school corporation numbers. So any school corporation number that's provided for any record in the tax data file must match back to a valid school corporation number that's contained in your county's Pay 22 certified budget order. It's kind of comparable to the state assigned taxing district check that we perform within the Gateway Abstract application itself. And then we do a check for the adjustments file, this is a mathematical check. Simply verifies that in the adjustments file, the total amount of any deduction or exemption or credit, when that's broken down by the 1% circuit breaker, 2% circuit breaker, 3% circuit breaker caps, that the amounts listed in those individual caps total up to the total amount of that particular exemption, deduction, or credit. So again, it's just a mathematical verification. We also are including a check that looks for any instances of records that have a personal property adjustment code in the adjustments file, but are not actually coded as a personal property record. So for an example, if you have a real property record in your tax data code, but in your tax data file, I should say, but it has a personal property soldier's exemption associated with it, that would be an example of a record that would get picked up in this check. And then we're also incorporating a couple of additional mathematical checks here. One of them is a verification of looking for any instances of where the circuit breaker cap amounts in your adjustments files are exceeding what the circuit breaker cap AVs are in your tax data file. An example of this would be, let's say you have a record in your tax data file. It's a homestead property, so let's say it has $100,000 of assessed value in the 1% homestead AV land and improvement. And then that same record in the adjustments file has a number of deductions applied to it. And those deductions in the adjustments file total up to $200,000. So you only have $100,000 of AV in the tax data file, but you have $200,000 of AV in the 1% in the adjustments file. That's going to flag an issue that will be noted on a record that will be noted on your issues workbook. And then another check that we're adding is a verification or looking for any instances of where the total amount of adjustments, so total amount of deductions and exemptions, is actually exceeding the total gross AV for the property itself in the tax data file. Again, you can't have more in deductions and exemptions than what your overall gross assessed value for the property is. A few things are an important item to note about these new checks that we're including that are brand new for the Pay 22 review cycle. If any of the checks that I just went over during the past couple of slides, if they exceed the 3% tolerance for these new checks, we will treat that as a warning item for this particular review cycle instead of dinging your data as non-compliant. That said, if any of these new checks do exceed the 3% tolerance for the Pay 22 review cycle, we highly recommend and encourage the auditor staff to review those records on the issues workbook and determine what items may need to be corrected so that those same issues don't get repeated when you submit your data for the Pay 23 cycle. So that is an overview of the property tax data review process that we will be doing during the next couple of months. Let's talk a bit about the real and personal property data compliance process. So the spring review of real and personal property is basically, it's the second part of a two-phase review. For any county assessors that are on the webinar today, you're familiar with the primary review that our division does on your data sets, and that occurs in the fall. And typically you'll get your compliance review report from the DLGF sometime in October, November of that year when you submit your real and personal property data. The secondary review of your real and personal property data is basically doing a comparative analysis of your data to what the auditor's property tax data was submitted in Gateway Abstract in the spring. And again, the secondary review is much more limited in scope compared to what we do data-wise for the fall review, which is a much more in-depth review of the various data files that you submit as part of your real property and personal property data submission. For our spring review process, and the secondary compliance review of the real and personal property, we're essentially just doing a comparative analysis of your parcel file versus your tax data file. And we're looking for any instances of missing records in either data set. And then we're also looking for discrepancies in gross AVs between the data set. Similarly, we're going to do that comparative analysis between your first prop file and your tax data file, and looking for any instances of records that are missing in either data set, and looking for discrepancies in gross AVs between those data sets. That's why I mentioned that lot modification tracking document that the county auditors will provide to us. That's very helpful for us to complete our review when doing this comparative analysis. So when the department completes its review of the county's real and personal property data in the spring, it's going to send the county assessor two documents. The county assessor will receive a property issues workbook, which will be an Excel file. They'll receive a separate email for the real property and a separate email for the personal property. And this issues workbook that will be part of that email is going to provide an itemized breakdown of the records that contain either possible or probable errors when we ran the data through our review process. And then the other item that will be included on the email or attached to the email is the compliance report itself. And that's going to be a PDF document. And the compliance report is going to provide the summary of the different compliance checks that we performed on your real property and personal property. And it's also going to provide the official status of your data set. So the property assessment issues workbook, again, the county assessors will receive two of those. There'll be one for real, there'll be one for personal. The issues workbook will have multiple tabs, and each tab on that workbook will pertain to a specific data check that we ran on your data set. One thing to note about the real property issues workbook and the personal property issues workbook, these documents that you receive in the spring for county assessors, they're going to contain more tabs on them than the workbook that you received in the fall. And the reason why they will have more tabs is because the issues workbooks that you'll receive in the spring contain that additional comparative analysis that we're doing between either the parcel file and the tax data file, or the first prop file and the tax data file. So it will have all the same tabs on the workbook that you had in the fall, but it's going to have those additional tabs to include the comparative analysis that we're conducting as part of our spring review. In terms of an official status at the end of the real and personal property compliance review process in the spring, there are essentially two possible outcomes. There's going to be either a non-compliant status or a compliance status. And again, a compliance status is what you're aiming for as part of the review process. If a county's real or personal property data is deemed non-compliant, that means that the county assessor will have to review the errors that we noted on the issues workbook, make any necessary corrections, and then resubmit their data for another round of reviews by the data analysis division here at the DLGF. If the county's real and or personal property data is deemed compliant, which again, that's the status that you're aiming for, there's no further action required by the county assessor's office in terms of needing to correct their pay 22 data and resubmit that to the department for a round of reviews. You're basically good to go, but what we do recommend is the issues workbook that's included in your email. You go through the various tabs on that issues workbook, look at the records that we note, and then determine what applicable corrections might be needed to those records so that the same errors or issues don't get repeated in the future submission cycles, so that they don't carry forward when you submit your data for the pay 23 cycle. So that is a summary of the the data compliance process for real and personal property that we conduct in the spring. What I'd like to do now is an overview of some of the information that is available to the public on the Gateway Public Reporting site. So the Gateway Public Reporting site offers a pretty wide variety of reports to the general public. You do not need to have a Gateway user account to sign in and access this information. Anyone who has access to the internet and a web browser can get onto Gateway and access this information at their leisure. The information contained in these reports comes from the different data that has been submitted by the local units of government via the different applications and gateways. So we'll have information available for abstract, for budget, for CNAV, for Form 22, for TIF management. There is just a wide variety of reports that are available out there to the public. And in addition to these reports, certain data files that county auditors and county assessors submit to the DLGF and TLSA, they're also available for download to the public. So this is a screenshot of the Gateway main menu. So this is what you would basically see if you typed in gateway.ifionline.org. And typically, if you're a county official and you're needing to log in, you would, over on the right-hand side, you click on local officials login here. But if you would just want to see what information is available to the public in general, what you want to do is up at the top menu bar, there's a report search option and there's a download option that you can click on. If you click on the report search, that's going to take you to a list or kind of a category listing of the different types of reports that are available to the public via Gateway. And as you can see, the one that's pointed to by the arrow, there's a report, there's a section that pertains specifically to the abstract reports that county auditors provide via Gateway Abstract. And then in terms of the files that are available for download on the Gateway Public Reporting site, if you were to click on the download option at the top menu bar there, that's going to take you to the download data page. And there's a property files section there that we make available the tax bill or the tax data file, the adjustments file, the parcel file, which contains a listing of all the real property records in the county, and then the personal file, which contains a listing of all the personal property filing records in the county. We have those data files that are available for download to the public going back all the way to the Pay 2012 cycle. And then a member of the public can choose a specific county if they wanted to download just a particular county's data, or they have the option for downloading all 92 counties' data in one file. So since we have a little bit of time, what I would like to do is do just a quick overview or run through of a few of the reports that are available to the public on the Gateway Public Reporting site. So I'll minimize the PowerPoint slide deck here, and then you'll see the Gateway main menu here. So again, this is what anyone from the general public would see if they typed in gateway.ifionline.org. And then if you wanted to see the reports that we have available to the public, you would click on the report search option at the top. And then, since we've been talking about abstract, show you a list of the various abstract reports that are available. You click on County Abstract Public Reports. And there are, I believe, a total of 23 different reports that are made available to the public. And essentially, these reports mirror the same information that county auditors see when they're logged into Gateway Abstract itself. So after the county auditor submits their information in Gateway Abstract, that information gets made available to the public via this reporting site. So I'll show you an example of of a few reports here. If you want to look at an AV summary that was provided via the county by Gateway Abstract, click on the AV summary link here. That will take you to the AV summary report builder page. And then from there, you'll select what county you're interested in. I'll choose Bartholomew just for practice here. And then tax year Pay 22, since we're in the Pay 22 cycle, click the View Report button. And that's going to show an AV summary of the various tax districts in the county. It's going to show the tax district code, the name, and then the gross AV for that tax district, the total adjustments, which would be any deductions or exemptions for records that are tied to that tax district, and then the total net AV, and then any TIF AV that may be applicable for that particular tax district, and then the TIF adjusted net AV. This particular report is exactly the same as the AV summary section in Gateway Abstract that the county auditors see when they're logged in. The only thing is, this is made available to the public. You don't need an account to log in to Gateway to see this information. Another example that is made available to the public, we'll do a TIF summary here. Again, choose Bartholomew for testing purposes, page 22, view report. And this is going to provide a summary, a high-level summary of the various TIF districts that are in a county. It's going to show the TIF district code, which again, as I referenced, starts with a T, and then followed by the 2-digit county code, and then the 3-digit TIF district code that's specific to that TIF district. It's going to list the TIF district name, the number of records, property records that are associated with that TIF district, and then it'll show any of real property TIF AV for that TIF district. If applicable, any personal property TIF AV, and then the total TIF AV associated with that TIF district. And then it will also show the levy captured by that TIF district, and then the gross taxes apportioned to that particular TIF district. Again, this report that's on the public side is exactly the same layout as the TIF summary report that the county auditor will see when they're logged into Gateway Abstract itself. And if you are needing to export this report, you have a few options. You could export it as Word, Excel, PowerPoint, PDF, if you needed to export it from the report builder. And then another report I'll show you is the district summary, which is basically, it is the entire layout of the Gateway Abstract data the county auditor provides in Gateway Abstract. So again, I'll choose Bartholomew as an example. Tax year 22. And since there's so many columns of data on this particular report, you probably have to scroll over to the right, click on the View Report button. But once it loads, you're going to basically get the entire abstract breakdown by taxing district in that particular county. It's going to show you the gross AV by the 1, 2, 3% buckets for that district, as well as the total amount of gross AV. And then it's going to show you the adjustments by the 1, 2, 3% buckets. That's going to be your total amount of deductions and exemptions for that tax district. Total adjustments amount, and then it's going to show you the net AV broken down by the 1, 2, 3% buckets, as well as the total net AV. Any TIF AV that may be associated with that particular tax district, and the TIF adjusted net AV, the certified tax district rate, and then the total levy, credits, statement processing charges, late assessment penalties, delinquent penalties and interest, and then total taxes for that particular taxing district. So again, it's basically just a complete overview of the Gateway Abstract data that county auditors submit in the application itself. So that is another example of one of the reports that's available to the public on the Gateway Public Reporting site. And finally, one other report that I will point out is the circuit breaker report. Since the circuit breaker adjusted rates have not yet been calculated, those normally don't get released till sometime, I believe, in April. The 22 information is not available yet, but we'll just show you an example of what is available. Bartholomew for tax year 2020. So the circuit breaker report is going to show you the total amount of circuit breakers for a particular county, and it's going to be broken down by each individual unit in that county and the funds within that county. So for Bartholomew County, the county unit itself looks like there was, for let's say, the general fund for Bartholomew County, they had a circuit breaker impact, over 65 circuit breaker impact of $22,473. And then their 1, 2, 3% circuit breakers of $902,720. for a total of a little over $925,000, a circuit breaker for their general fund for the county unit. So this information I know is requested quite often by FAs as well as by school corporations. If you work in the county auditor's office and you ever get a request about trying to see the overall circuit breaker impact for a particular county, I would recommend that you direct those folks to check out the circuit breaker report that is available on the Gateway Public Reporting site. Again, the pay 22 information will probably be available sometime later on, probably late April or May, after the circuit breaker adjusted rates are calculated. So again, that's just an overview of some of the reports that are available on Gateway app, on the Gateway reporting site. There is a treasure trove of information. You could spend hours and hours on Gateway, just kind of getting lost in the various reports that are available. So since we are right at just a minute to go, basically I'll kind of wrap up here. So we've come to the end of our presentation today. If you happen to have a question related to today's presentation that comes to you after this webinar concludes, please feel free to email that question to the data inbox at data@dlgf.in.gov. Also, just reiterating a couple of points that Jenny made at the beginning, we will be posting today's PowerPoint presentation, a webinar survey, and the continuing education credit form for today's session to the department's webinar page. The department will be sending out a separate email correspondence with a link to this information as well. So with that said, we would like to thank everyone once again for attending today's webinar and wish everyone a great rest of their day.